Hey, what do you say, boys and girls? This is Bobby Blitz from Overkill. That's right, and you're watching Richard Metal Fan. You stay right here.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Richard Metal Fan Interviews. This is episode number 138, and today's guest I have the honor and the privilege to speak with the legendary Bobby Blitz Ellsworth from the almighty Overkill. Today we're going to be talking to him about what got him into metal, being a vocalist, as well as doing a deep dive in the discography of Overkill. So without further ado, let's go talk to Bobby. So what's up, guys? I have the honor and the privilege to speak with the legendary Bobby Blitz Ellsworth from Overkill. How are you doing today, Bobby?
Well, that's quite an introduction. I don't usually start my day with legendary status, but I'm doing quite well, thanks.
That's great to hear, man. So kind of like the format I want to do is I want to do like a quick rundown of your albums, as well as talk about like your journey as an artist from where you started to now, but take me back to young Bobby Blitz. So what were like the first bands that got you into metal, and what made you want to be a vocalist?
Well, I was, I guess I had a self-starter kind of a mentality, and asked my dad if I could work when I was a young teen. He put me to work at his office, like filing papers, and then soon after was a newsboy. And there was a Columbia Record House was something that you get in a weekly paper on Sunday, where you could get 12 LPs for like a dime or something.
Wow.
And I picked everything heavy. So there was Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Alice Cooper, et cetera, et cetera. I had no idea what I was getting, but that was my first exposure to anything with distortion. So I was 13, 14, 15 years old, and I was still in this record club, just getting heavier and heavier as let's say the climate for heavy music changed. So that was my introduction, young teens.
All right. And so how did Overkill form? Because I believe you all formed in 1980 in New Jersey.
We actually formed in New York. It was New City, New York. I went to a community college. I got tossed out of a college in Manhattan, and was in a community college taking communications courses. And one of the guys in my class was a guy named Rob Pasaric, and he asked me to, if I wanted to audition. I said I'm a bass player. Yeah, I could sing a few songs. So I went down there and started singing. The band was called DOA, and it was very short lived. But Pasaric and I stayed together, put an ad in a newspaper, and through that ad we found Rat Skates and my partner Dee Dee Verney, who I've been partners with ever since that day. And that was somewhere in, let's say, spring of 1980.
Awesome. And so tell me about like your first demo, which was in 1983, called Power in Black. Was that like something to just like send to record labels to help get Overkill noticed?
Well, it was something cool to do. It was, we were on a thing called New York Metal 84. We were on the Metal Massacre, the Brian Slagle thing out of Metal Blade. We did our own demo, Power in Black. I think that really what spawned us, we were starting to do original music, but when we got Bobby Gustafson in the band, I mean, he was still in high school at the time. We went 4-piece and really focused on the writing. So we took some of the older songs that we had done prior to him being in the band, and some of the newer ones that we had written with him. And that became our demo, which really kind of our first foot in the door. Demos were really important back then. It was, listen, if you're not going to get signed, do it yourself, tape trade it, get it to other people around the world, around the country, and let them start talking about it. And I think that always planted the seed for a band back then to have interest, or have a record label have interest in them. I mean, just like Metallica. Everybody always tells me, oh, Metallica, they really set the Bay Area. Hey, listen, it may be true, but their demo made it to the East Coast, and they had to travel 3,000 miles to get signed. If you know what I mean. They got signed in New Jersey.
Gotta have that DIY approach.
Yeah, well, that was social media back then, was to have a demo and then talk about it. Get in the phone or write letters. And so I suppose, if you were getting gigs and handing out your demo at, in Staten Island, New York, and New Jersey, and other places. I mean, the band relegated to Jersey soon after that, but we were doing gigs constantly and selling that demo for a few bucks, and that's what got us interest. Megaforce having interest in us eventually.
Awesome. And so how did they find Overkill, and what was it about them that made you guys be like, that's the label?
Well, they were iconic, almost upon arrival. They had a they had a stand in a local flea market called the Route 18 Flea Market, and they had all the new wave of British heavy metal. I mean, this is where I saw Venom. I mean, they knew me before, not before I was an Overkill, but they knew me before we had any kind of status. So they, we kind of, as they were coming up, we were coming up next to them. So it was hard for them not to notice us. We started filling clubs, etc. So the idea is they were right there, and then they made that big splash with Metallica. So it got them from that first record changing the climate of what music was about. The whole landscape changed after that. Thrash was kind of born, even though nobody knew what the rules were. But there was a lot of bands doing it, ourselves included. And I think that they just noticed that, we had the work ethic, and we also had, a local audience that would come see us and were dedicated under all circumstances. So I think that that's what got us and Megaforce, partnered together, or them taking us on at such an early time in our career.
Awesome. And tell me about like the making of the first Overkill album, Feel the Fire. I think it's, in my opinion, one of the most underrated thrash metal debut albums of all time. So what was the thought process making Feel the Fire?
Well, we went from a cover band into writing a lot of those songs early on. So I think you hear a lot of the cover influences that we have. You hear some of that Maiden-esque gallop in songs like Feel the Fire, that bass guitar. It sounds like the galloping horse. I think it was a good representation of our influences, whether that be even a little bit of the Sabbath stuff. Not like there's huge slowdown stuff, but we were always somebody about the break, where you'd break it down in the center, try to change the mood by changing the tempo. So I think it was again a good introduction to what we were about. But I think that we developed into what Overkill is after that. I think that we took a lot of those elements with us, but we went for a different template after that, which was much more of a thrash template, much more of the Hammerhead kind of a template, Kill the Command, or maybe even Rotten to the Core is kind of a thrashy tune.
Yeah, and I heard this album was originally going to be called First Blood. What was the reason for the title change?
There was a Stallone movie out at the time. It was very popular.
Oh, wow. I never knew that.
We were just throwing it around. I mean, it was just throwing it around. And Feel the Fire was, a title track was kind of cool, we thought. And it would have been that much more original,
Yeah.
It never went to First Blood to the point where we were like, oh, we should call it this. It's a bunch of kids sitting around drinking beer. Oh, we should call it First Blood. That's as simple as it was. It didn't go through like any offices or memos or shit. It was between Budweisers,
Yeah, and then going into the next album, Taking Over, because usually with the debut album, you have like your entire life to write, and there's a lot of hype with the first album. When it came to making Taking Over, did you feel like pressure to follow up Feel the Fire?
No, I didn't follow. There was no pressure. I just didn't even think the record was going to come. I mean, I thought it was a one and done, or maybe two and goodbye kind of a thing. But there was no pressure. It was the only pressure I had on a personal level was with Feel the Fire, I ran out. We got out of the local shows. Our show consisted of Baltimore to upstate New York and into Pennsylvania. That type of a sphere. But now, we were overseas with Anthrax and Agent Steel. We had done the whole Slayer, Raining Blood tour. I met them out in Seattle and came across the country with them. So I had never sang that much. So the pressure for me was I'd blown my voice out. I mean, how the fuck am I going to be able to sing these songs now when I can't even speak on the phone? And we were out with Slayer as that, was about to be recorded. So when we came back, it was time to get busy, get to work. But I took, I found a guy in the city. I forget who recommended him. His name was Don Lawrence. He was a singing instructor, and he taught me how to sing correctly. And very soon thereafter, I repaired myself, before it was too much damage. And then I went in and I noticed the difference in the two records. Do I sing better on Taking Over? I don't necessarily know that that's the case, but I sing different for sure. Yeah. And that's due to him. But that was the only pressure I felt personally.
Yeah, and still today, I think you're one of the few vocalists that literally almost sounds the same as you do from the 80s. Like, you pretty much have like a very consistent kind of voice.
It's like Mickey Mouse on speed,
Yeah. That's a good analogy, man. Going into the next album, Under the Influence, I love this album. What was it like going from this to this?
Well, I don't really care for that record as much as most people do. I mean, that's I mean, I get it that it was I thought we were chasing our own tails on that record. That's what I personally thought. I thought there were some good songs on it. I thought there were some great ideas on it. I think it just fell short of the mark. I think the beauty of Taking Over is that we started discovering the fact that even as a 4-piece, we could be a wall of sound with distinguishability. And when we went after Michael Wagner to mix this, who was, I mean, listen, he's a great talent, don't get me wrong. I just always felt that it was just us chasing something else. Some good songs on it. I mean, I like Drunken Wisdom, Hello from the Gutter, of course, Shred. But I think the majority of the record is just a little dysfunctional, and I'm not like a big fan of the production. But I do think, that said, is that it really set up the explosion on the next record, because I think that any of the things that we wanted to improve upon, we did so by Years of Decay.
Yeah, but kind of like still want to talk a little bit about Under the Influence, like Hello from the Gutter, one of my favorite Overkill songs. I know it was featured on Beavis and Butthead. How did like Mike Judge like reach out to you guys and be like, hey, we want to have your song featured on our show? How did that happen?
No, they just embarrass you without you even knowing it. They just you find out you're being embarrassed when your friends call you. I saw you on fucking Beavis and Butthead. They're calling.
Yeah, and I think this is actually, of course, the album artwork, the introduction to your mascot, Charlie. How did the inspiration of Charlie come to be?
Well, that's Faster and Larson. Those guys, I think, were Marvel comic guys, or one of the you can see like the little guy that's sticking his head out of the side sewer pipe. I mean, that's right out of like a Spider-Man. Yeah, it's right out of a Spider-Man comic book. These guys have done a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I know there was like a little change in the artwork.
We wanted a mascot because all bands that were great had a mascot. That's what we thought.
Of course, like Eddie from Iron Maiden.
You just go right back to fucking Eddie from Iron Maiden, and the fucking conversation's over. If you say Iron Maiden, somebody says Eddie. I mean, you put it together. That was our idea. And I mean, even right down to the green, it was all kind of marketing in a very juvenile kind of a way. We wanted to stand out in the room, and it did, because all the other T-shirts were red. So if you saw a couple of green ones in there, you said, "Oh, those are Overkill shirts."
Yeah.
So Charlie came about because of, to some degree, using other people's templates. I mean, to say, hey, what do we see about these guys that have them, recognizable? And the mascot was one of them. And Charlie originally was, it was Dee Dee's idea. It looked like fucking Popeye with wings on a cocktail napkin that he scrolled out in a crayon, But it was something eventually we gave to an artist, and it became, I suppose, for us, identifiable. So when you see that winged, creature, that winged bat, the winged skull, you go, oh, if you're a metal fan, that's an Overkill. That's Overkill's Eddie. Charlie.
Yeah, and I know everybody's been always compare like the Death Bat from Avenged Sevenfold to Charlie. Everybody says like, oh, Avenged Sevenfold ripped off Overkill. Like, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I don't say anything about it because
I think it's kind of dumb.
I mean, imitation is a great form of flattery. Yeah. I'm not at liberty to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
That's that.
I just had to get your thoughts on that. But kind of going it.
Yeah. It's an old story. We had a T-shirt once that said, it said Overkill, had the bat, said Overkill established 1980, and on the back it said, "This is our logo. Go get your fucking own."
Yeah. That's a great one, man. Next up, I want probably my favorite Overkill album, The Years of Decay. I loved this album, but what was the thought process going into making this album? Did you feel like you were on to something?
I mean, one of the great things also about Under the Influence, you have to look at everything as kind of a string. What precedes it affects what follows it. And I think, the addition of Sid Falk during the Under the Influence sessions, Sid wasn't quite that thrash drummer in Under the Influence, and that might have had some of the effect with regard to how those songs came out or how thrashy they came out. Because it's necessary to have a great relationship with the right hand of the guitar and those feet, and Sid was a great drummer at that point, but he became better and better. And by Years of Decay, he was a better drummer. And I think that this is part of the culmination of why this record, it's just more in touch with each song. It's a full fucking record. I remember we did it in Brooklyn. It was like pulling fucking teeth, though. It was just that whole thing where everything just, in my opinion, it just wasn't always smooth. It just seemed like we were pushing each other and just poking each other in the ribs simultaneously. I think Dee Dee kind of held it together. I think Bobby Gustafson had some great fucking ideas for this record. Skull Crusher, obviously, Elimination. But I think Dee Dee Verney was, I think he was a glue to this record. And Sid Falk being, to some degree, being the...
he's amazing.
Yeah, the performance MVP, I mean, he came out here, and then he came out, a record later on Horrorscope. He raised the bar again. So I mean, to me, I was really happy with the results of this. But it was kind of, we kind of had the feeling it was going to be, the end of the relationship. I mean, it was just that feeling when you look back on it, you go, oh, I see why it kind of ended, so.
Yeah, and a cool thing I saw was on Metal Archives that apparently legend has it that Dimebag Darrell was impressed with Bobby Gustafson's guitar tone as well as Terry Date's production on this album, that Patera hired Terry to produce Cowboys from Hell. I thought that was cool.
Terry was working with Terry was unbelievable. I mean, I was married at the time. I had just recently gotten married. I got married after Years, and but I had been living with my girlfriend, and she had a son from another marriage, so I was raising the kid. And I used to always talk to him in this Sylvester the Cat voice, come on, son, let's go get a mouth. All the other kids have mouth, that kind of. Well, as a kid, I'm in there doing Elimination, right? And he had been up to the studio and something. Terry's behind there. He goes, "You sound like you have a fucking lisp." And I realized I'm singing in Sylvester the Cat, Terry, and Terry actually recognized it. And he made it so comfortable to get good tracks while we recorded that. So if the writing might have been like pulling teeth, I think the recording itself was actually, because of Terry just being Mr. Mellow about stuff, but Mr. Mellow / Mr. Heavy. I think it was great results. I think it was a great way to culminate that part of our careers, because if we really wanted to make that record and it was, a little bit tough to do, harder work, the recording of it let us believe that we had done the right things because it was that much more relaxed.
Yeah, and I hard to believe next year will be the 45th anniversary of this album. And what I want to ask, is there a chance we can get a celebration somehow? Maybe do a tour where you play this start to finish?
Probably not. No.
Oh.
Not for me.
All right.
How's that?
Yeah.
No thanks.
But it's crazy, from like taking over Under the Influence and the Years of Decay, it was like released year after year after year. Like, do you guys were just like really inspired, just wanted to like crank out music fast?
Well, no, I mean, it was also our visibility. I mean, you have to understand, I mean, what was your visibility back there? I mean, actual physical rags and fucking, MTV's Headbangers Ball. I mean, it didn't even fucking exist for Field of Fire. It came about during the Taking Over record where we had In Union We Stand on Headbangers Ball. So this was our visibility. So the only way to stay visible for us was to release records at a pretty consistent rate, to be able to get out there. That was it. There was none of this kind of shit that we're doing right now. Social media was putting flyers on under windshield wipers and shaking people's hands, and getting punched in the mouth or saying the wrong thing, and getting reputation. That's what social media was. You believe the balls on those guys? That kind of a thing. You got reputation. But it's, it was a different world. So you needed to stay visible by consistency, and that consistency ran on a clock, of a yearly type of a clock.
Awesome. And then next album, Horrorscope. I love this album. What was this album like, recording process like?
Well, we wanted to repeat for sure the production elements that we had on Years of Decay. I think we actually exceeded them to some degree on this record, because Terry was a year more experienced by this point. I think for us personally, with the changes, with Bobby being gone, I mean, he was a really big part of the songwriting. I'll never deny that. I mean, he was a great idea guy and great riff guy, had a killer right hand. I think that we had felt somewhere we had something to prove, because if Dee Dee and I were saying, hey, we got to move on, this is just not working for us, prove it. You know, prove it if you're you know, you still got the same, you know, set of nuts on you. And I think the record did. I mean, I remember John Z saying, you know, I'm just not sure. And it was just like, and he hadn't even really heard the songs yet. He'd heard some demos. And he asked us to audition the record. And I thought to myself, and listen, I've never been a fucking rock star guy. I'm more that guy getting punched in the mouth than a fucking rock star guy. But yeah. I was fucking insulted. I was like, he wants us to fucking audition the record? We're signed to the fucking, you know, that. So we set up in a place called Lemoore. And I don't think he was as concerned about the songs afterwards. He was more concerned about our replacement value that we had for Bobby. We brought two guys in, Rob Canavino and Merrick Gann. Yeah. And then I realized after that, but I think that lit the fire under our ass to make the record that much more intense. You know what I mean? Instead of going, oh, I'm insulted, it was like, how fucking dare you? You know, that kind of thing. So I think it was I think the intensity that lit the fire under our ass, you know, and even afterwards he and I had a conversation and I thanked him for it, you know, because it lit the fire under my ass. We got Terry involved, Sid had raised the bar, Canavino and Gant were a great team. So yeah. It just seemed to work as a great record for us and a great project.
Yeah, and now having two guitars instead of like one that you had for up until before this, like I think it sounds a lot more fuller and a lot more heavier.
It would be hard to compare, you know, 2 to 1 too. We just didn't want to be sitting in there having, you know, the ultimate question. And you know, you knew the questions were going to come, but it was just like we wanted people to concentrate more so on the music. And I think it would be harder to be, listen, you draw lines, you like whatever you like. I mean, that's fine. You know, I do this because, I mean, it trips my trigger, not for any other fucking reason, you know. And, you know, if somebody's like, oh, I like the earlier stuff, well, that's fucking fine. I have no problem. But it's hard to compare the earlier stuff with the later stuff because, you know, we said, let's just get two guitars. It's just going to make that much more of a difference, you know, with regard to comparatives and with regard to a fullness, like you said.
Yeah, and just like this whole album's great. Like Coma, great opener, Infectious, Thanks for Nothing. And I thought it was interesting that you covered Edgar Winter's Frankenstein. What made you guys decide to cover that song?
I think it was Dee Canavino, you know. I mean the big, you know, the big joke around Megaforce was I never sounded better than on fucking Frankenstein. I was like, yeah, thanks a lot. Fuckers, it's a fucking instrumental.
Yeah.
But I think it was just something they were jamming around, you know, and it just started turning into that, like, oh my God, this is turning into some, like, you know, thrash monster especially with Sid. Again, talk about an MVP, the way he plays those drums during that, you know, that entire thing. I mean, during those breaks. I mean, we cut the drum solo out, but the point is that the drums are a big part of that fucking tune.
Yeah. So
it just worked. And we even thought afterwards of like going into things like Hocus Pocus by Focus. I don't know if you know the song, but it's where they do this yodeling thing, but it's all this big heavy riff stuff and no other vocals. But it just, you know, for us it worked. You know, it just seemed like a great introduction to put a cover on a record to do something that unique.
Yeah, I think it's great. And then your next album, which is, I believe, I Hear Black, it's a bit of a different album, and I hard to believe this year is also 30 years of I Hear Black. So what was kind of like the mind frame going from Horrorscope to I Hear Black?
Well, I think the difference is just really simple. It needed more time for the songs to develop, and the reason it needed more time for the songs to develop, and I don't hate the record. I'm not looking at it that way. I think it's a different record, but I think there's some really fucking great ideas on that. But the difference is that those guys wanted to write now, and before it was pretty much, you know, at the beginning it was 4 of us: Rat, Dee, Bobby, and myself. Then it was Dee, Bobby, and myself, and then it was Dee and I. And now Rob and Merritt wanted to write songs. So we're talking about, you know, a difference in age of, I think Merritt was still, I think he was like 21 or 22. I mean, he was a young guy. So he was influenced by a whole bunch of different shit than Dee and I were influenced by. So, you know, we didn't want the band to break up and start heading in different directions. We thought we had some, you know, we thought we had some trails to blaze here. So we let them start writing. And I think that's what you hear. I think you hear the difference between 2 writers on Horrorscope and 4 writers on I Hear Black. You know, and I had to write with all 3 of those dudes. You know, I had to finish all those songs. So the point is I'm trying to finish those songs. I'm going, geez, I just don't get where this one's fucking coming from.
Yeah.
So I think that there was just that little bit of confusion where we needed it to develop for another couple of months before we could have really had our fucking hands around it or our arms around it. But still a record I like. I think some good ideas on it.
Yeah, and I think it's like your most like experimental album to date, in my opinion.
Well, different writers, you know, and then all of a sudden we said enough of this shit, and you're gonna hear it on the next record. You know, it's back to a thrash record again. You know?
Yeah, which in my opinion is a very underrated album. W.F.O. Wide Fucking Open. I this is pretty much, in my opinion, my introduction to Overkill, because you know my father, rest in peace, he pretty much got me into metal, and this was one of the first albums I've heard from Overkill. So, and hard to believe this album is pretty much as old as me. So, what was the thought process making this album?
I don't know, every time I hear that record, I think it's Dee Dee's Murder Spree with that fucking
the bass like turned up really loud, but
don't. Sounds like he's beating people with a fucking lead pipe through the entire. He's beating them with a lead pipe on a rubber skull.
Yeah.
But I think the idea behind that record was really just kind of go for it. I remember. You know, I just bought a house. It was the first record I had written here in the house, but I was like, man, I just wasn't myself at the time, but I was fucking angry. So all the shit I was putting in there was like super angry, like Where It Hurts and Fast Junkie and, you know, Gasoline Dream. Fuck, man. I'd wake up in a fucking catatonic fucking haze in my basement, you know, and I'd tripping over beer cans and fucking cigarettes put out the floor, you know, it's a new house I bought, and thinking to myself, what am I doing? But simultaneously, when I think about it afterwards, I said, boy, I wrote a fucking angry record. But what ended up happening was it put me in a point where I ended up having to get sober afterwards. So it actually worked out. It actually worked out pretty good. So if you take those elements into it with regard to my end of the writing, you know, songs like Gasoline Dream, which are angry, burning the whole fucking thing down and fuck it. You know, that's really what it's about. I guess that makes it explains it a little bit more so. You know, I was full of fucking piss, vinegar, and testosterone. You know, it was just fucking, I wasn't going to take shit from anybody, and I was going to fucking write the most angry record I could. And that's what my end of that record's about.
Yeah, I just wish you could bring back some of the like deeper cuts. Like, I'd love to hear Where It Hurts live, Fast Junkie. I remember you even played Bastard Nation the last time I saw you guys a few years ago, which I was surprised.
It's on the live record that we did that follows right up after this. We did it in Detroit and Cleveland. Wrecking Everything, right?
Yeah, I think it's Wrecking Your Neck Live.
Wrecking Your Neck Live. There's two of them. That's right. Wrecking Your Neck and then Wrecking Everything's the one after that, 2000.
Yeah, and I love how you also did like a sample in the beginning of a new high and lows from Carlito's Way. What made you guys decide to put like a sample at the beginning?
Is that the only sample on that record, or is there another one too? That's from Carlito's Way.
Yeah, that's the only one.
It's Carlito's Way. It's when he's in the bathroom, when he goes into the pool hall. Yeah, he had just killed everybody, but he's kind of talking his way out of the bathroom.
You're gonna fucking die big time. Here comes the pain. Yeah.
We just like samples. I mean, that was more Dee Dee's thing. I mean, he threw some other shit in there later on. He put some stuff in from Raising Arizona, shit from Batman on Battle, I think, on the next record.
Yeah.
It just that song, A New High and Lows. I mean, it kind of culminates everything that I was talking about prior, you know, because it was angry, but it was also depressive. And I think that somewhere there, I stopped doing that. You know, maybe when I did get sober at that particular, I mean, I stayed sober for 10 years. I'm a beer drinker at this point in my life, but at that point in my life, I mean, if you look at that lyrically, that is by no means the Overkill you know in the modern era that can still put a smile on your face.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, that is some fucking dark shit.
So, yeah, I think it's like your guys' darkest album to date.
Yeah, it's just some dark shit, and it just shouldn't. You know, it was necessary to happen to have shit turn around after that. You know, love or hate the records afterwards. Again, it still was something. It's still a personal journey when you're writing the tunes. It's not about writing them always for other people. It's about understanding you're part of a community, but you're still writing them for yourself, and it has to be an expression of what's going on internally for it to be real. So if I'm saying waiting for my heart to stop, I hear it beating in the dark. It's not a very happy moment in my life.
Yeah. And then going into the next album, The Killing Kind, what was that like going from W.F.O to The Killing Kind?
Well, here we are. I mean, there's new guys. You know, the other guys just split. Merritt split. Rob split. It was just like, you know, they were a team. And I honestly forget what the problem was. Oh, I think Cannavino wanted to race motorcycles. He started doing this like flat track shit. And no, it was super bikes. He was doing super bikes. You know, where you touch the knee on the ground, coming around the curves. I mean, he taught me way back how to ride. And I think Merritt just wanted to stop. Rob wasn't going to be there, and Merritt wasn't going to be there. And we found Sebastian Marino, who suggested Joe Como as a second. Sebastian tried to audition for us during the Cannavino and Gant era. He had been playing with a band called Anvil then. You probably know him out of Canada. And
yeah.
And we remained friends. So it was just like, it was a pretty simple phone call, I remember. It was just like, you know, these guys left. I was like, I told Diddy, I said, I'm getting on the phone to Sebastian. I mean, he was one shot from missing the band, you know, from getting this gig. We took Cannavino because we knew him better than Sebastian. That was the reason. He was like a guitar tech for us at one point. But a great guitar player, don't get me wrong. Yeah. So doing a Killing Kind was kind of like walking into it, kind of tiptoeing into it. It was a different era. We had just lost the Atlantic deal, signed with CMC out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I actually rode down there with a demo, put it on the guy's desk, you know, because, you know, it wasn't like, I knew that, you know, everybody knew the times were changing. It was all based on what was coming out of Seattle and the West Coast, and it was a much more depressive type of music than what really upbeat thrash would do. And I think it was a little bit different of a record for us, but I think that it was a necessary step to get us beyond that.
Right. And then going into the next album, From the Underground Below. Whoa, love this album. What was it like making this?
Good fun. That covers we had a different cover. The cover's the thing that's inside, and we hated it. So we grabbed that out of National Geographic. That picture with all the crosses.
Yeah.
But that thing that like Voodoo Grave was what we originally had as a cover. We were like, oh my God, what the fuck is this? You know? It looks like some fucking tribal thing threw up all over in fucking front of the record. You know, it just didn't describe what we were about. But the record itself, I thought was a great step for us. And especially our first experience with Colin Richardson. I mean, the guy gave it wings. Yeah, I mean, he just totally brought it all together. I remember picking him up at the airport, bringing him to Connecticut. And I was talking with Didi and him, and he said, hey, can you give me a few minutes with the engineer? I want to hear some tracks. We were like, sure. And I walked outside, and Didi and I were looking through the glass, and I could see Colin doing like the Pete Townsend Whirlybird, you know, like he's playing guitar like this. And I looked at Didi, and I said, we either made the best decision of our life or we are absolutely fucked. So it was,
yeah,
I think it was A. He really brought the record together. Some good songs on it. Long Time Dying, Save Me. What's that? The one it opens with?
It Lives.
It Lives, right? And that one that's the one with the other sample in it. That's from Raising Arizona.
Nice. And then your next album, Necroshine. I love that album as well. Tell me about like the recording process of that.
Well, it was kind of weird because that's when I got sick. We were doing the Underground, and it was really strange. I'm telling you a lot of this from my perspective. Yeah. We did record it at the same place, the Carriage House in Stamford, Connecticut. Andy Katz, who was the engineer, actually helped us produce the record. But I'd gotten sick, and this was going to have to be handled, and they didn't know how deep it went. And I remember saying to Didi, I called him, Didi and I have now had a relationship since 1980, so it's almost been 20 years at this point. And he's like, yeah, bro, what do you need? Do you need some cash? You need and I was like, nah, just send me whatever you got. And you sent me Necroshine. And it was like, boy, talk about therapy when you're going through cancer. I was like sitting here in this house writing Necroshine while I was waiting for the results to see if it had permeated my sinuses and gone beyond into the brain. So it was, it was a pretty cool you know, it was a pretty cool walk into that record to start the whole thing with the song Necroshine. And I have some great fucking songs on that record too. Dee Dee was really into down tuning at that time. Songs like 80 Cycles, I thought was like, I thought that was just a kick right in the nuts, man. There was just a low end on that with fucking Shake Grandma's Dishes.
Yeah. And then, of course, your next album, Bloodletting. I almost feel like Necroshine and Blood Shedding are almost kind of like yin and yang. What was like going into from Necroshine to Bloodletting? Blah, can't even talk.
Well, I'm trying to think what happened then. I think that what happened was that record company that I talked about in North Carolina, CMC, had been morphing into something else. And what it morphed into was Sanctuary, which was the Iron Maiden guys. That was Rod Smallwood had partnered up with Tom Lipsky at CMC. And it was, we were in between things. And I remember we went to Connecticut to do it. It was Dave Linsk was on guitar at this particular point. This was his
how'd he
first,
join?
He joined right after Necroshine. He did the tour. He actually did a record called Cover Kill before this, which was a whole bunch of B-sides for Japan, and then we added a few songs that we liked from the 90s. But we were doing it. We thought we were getting the same guy who had helped us with Necroshine, Andy Katz, and we got some other kid. And this kid had no idea what we were about. It was erasing tracks and all sorts of other shit. So when we finally pulled the whole thing together, we got Colin to even pull it together more so. And that was our second experience with Colin Richardson, was a Bloodletting record. But still some good songs in it. You know, Death Comes Out to Play, What I'm Missing. I love the opener on that. There was some good, fun, upbeat songs on that we pulled together. But for sure not our finest moment with regard to looking at it as a whole project.
Well, that's interesting. I never knew all that. And going into the next album, Killbox 13, I'm hard to believe this year is also 20 years of that album. Like, there's a lot of like anniversaries for Overkill this year. But tell me about the thought process making Killbox 13.
Hey, bro, when you have 20 records, you get a lot of fucking anniversaries. You know what I'm saying? Think of it as like having 20 kids. You're gonna have a birthday every fucking month.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, man. Man, you guys just keep pumping out albums. It's crazy to this day.
Killbox 13 was our first experience with Colin Richardson full time. He did From Note One with us. We flew him over. He lived down the Jersey Shore with Dave for a month. We rented a little house down there for those two, which really helped Dave's guitar work. I mean, I'm not saying Dave couldn't do it, but they had an understanding with each other because they slept in the same house. They had breakfast together. They got to the studio together. They worked together. And I think it was just that thing that pulled both of them together. And Dave helped me immensely with the vocals on that because I was having a little bit of trouble on that record. But I think that when it was done, I think it was a great piece of real estate. I think it's Dave's first great works with us that you could see what he was capable of doing. Colin did a great job with the mix. I mean, it's a great sounding record. It's just a weird time that it came out. It's like 2003 or so.
Yeah.
2003, 2004. And this wasn't the flavor of the day. People just didn't give a shit, you know, so.
Yeah, and of course it was also the first album with Derek, but I know he only did like backing vocals. He didn't even play guitar up until Wings of War. I was just curious why that.
Well, we just wanted consistency on it. Derek also came in, you know, at that particular time as a bass player. We were on the Bloodletting tour, and I think Dee Dee had his second daughter, right before he left. So we were prepared in case he had to go home. I mean, this was a new situation, and he had to go home, so we just flew Derek in. You know, it was just that simple. You know, I remember he came out of the back lounge wearing something that we would never wear on stage. You know, and I looked at him. I looked at Dave Linsk. Dave looked at me. I said, "What do you think?" I said, "I don't know. It looks like he has his sister's shirt on." Right? He goes, "What are you looking at?" I said, "Let me ask you a question." I said, "Would fucking Lemmy wear that?"
That's fucking awesome, man. then moving on to the next album, Really 14 is how you pronounce it. I love this album. Funny enough, this actually came out the day before my 11th birthday in 2005. Like, what was the thought process making this album? Because I think it's a kind of like a fun album.
Well, I mean, I think the songwriting's good on it. I think the production is absolute shit on it. It's just not the record that I wanted to hear. I mean, this is all, this whole time I haven't mentioned one of the guys in the band. That's Tim Mallory, and Tim had been with us, way back since I think he came in during the Horrorscope era, and he's probably the longest standing drummer we've ever had in this band. I mean, Tim's been there since touring Horrorscope all the way up until, oh gosh, Immortalis in 2007.
Yeah.
But this was a real confused era. I think that what we did was, in my opinion, was that we couldn't mix the guitars correctly with everything else that was going on. So everything suffered trying to get the guitars to the position that they should have been.
Yeah.
So not one of my favorite records, but some of the songwriting, the Bats in the Belfry, etc. I mean, I always like the fact that Dee Dee likes to experiment with stuff. I mean, it keeps me on my toes. It's not just, he doesn't just come out with this thrash template, and it was even back then, we were doing fucking with groove as far back as Horrorscope. We were fucking with thrash. There was some rock and roll in there. There was, all sorts of different, approaches that we were taking. And I always loved that about him because I think he kept the rest of us kind of on our toes. When somebody says, "Oh, Overkill record is just thrash," I've heard it all before. It's like, okay, you're not listening. All that proves to me is you're not listening if you're saying it's just thrash. Because I mean, to this day, even in Scorched, you hear groove, you hear rock and roll, you hear, you hear progressive thrash. I mean, there's different ways we go with this stuff. So I thought that this record was its highlight would be the songwriting itself.
Yeah, and I still love, like, probably my favorite songs is the last song on here, Old School. It has that kind of like old school kind of punky kind of vibe, but also the chorus sounds like something like you're singing on like a pirate ship, like here's to the old school, the madly drunk fool.
Like with a big tankard of ale, right?
Yeah.
Everybody should be doing this.
Yeah, I just love it. I think that's just like a very like fun like party kind of song. Like that's the kind of vibe I get with it.
Well, it's a good pickup. I mean, and I think that we talked about like if W.F.O is dark for me, this is more of a representation of what Overkill's about. Like, we're serious about our music, but we're not serious necessarily always about ourselves. I mean, if you're in a fucking band, you better enjoy doing it. Especially if you're not, you're not at the higher echelon, because the enjoyment is what sparks you to do it. And I think that this is a good representation. Songs like Old School show that old punky side, man. When we were a cover band all the way back in the old days, and we took the song "Fuck You" with us all the way to this day because we love that punk vibe of that stuff. This was done by the Subhumans out of Vancouver, Canada. It wasn't our song, but we were doing Ramones covers or Sex Pistols covers or blah blah blah. So you throw in something like Old School or Garden State off of Wings of War. It just shows the roots or kind of where we came from or why we enjoy doing what we do.
Yeah. And then the next album, Immortalis. I love this album. And I know I thought Skull and Bones, you got Randy Bly from Lamb of God doing guest vocals. How'd you end up hooking up with him to sing on Skull and Bones?
Well, Mustaine called me the year before this record, and he was putting together Gigantor, and we were right in the middle of a couple of things. I think we had been on Spitfire Records, and Spitfire was going to close down. They were sold. The guy Paul who ran it was out of New Orleans. I mean, great fucking dude. And it was going to Eagle Rock Entertainment, and we were going to be shit out of luck. So Mustaine called me. He goes, "Hey man, I want you. Be fun if we could tour again, get on the Gigantor." I was like, "Yeah, man, that would be great." Because all I need is promotion from your record company. I'm like, "Oh shit, I'm not going to have a record," but I never told him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in any case, we approached the whole thing, in good spirit and friendship, and we acted like we had a record company, and everybody loved the band. And Blythe would come out every night and sing Old School with us. Nice. He would stop fucking interviews and just like, "Oh, Overkill's at the fucking ninth song. I gotta go." And he'd come out and he'd do Old School with me every fucking night on that tour. Well, maybe not the first two nights, but by the third night, he was out there doing it. And it was Mustaine loved it, and so did Randy, and so did the Lamb of God guys. Boy, we had some good fun. We drank a lot of beer and had a lot of laughs on that whole thing. And when we came back, we were signed with Immortalis, and because we had 6 offers on the table, and Bodog Records, who did it, was John Zazula, so it was kind of like going home again. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be cool if like Overkill and Lamb of God did a tour together. It would be cool if Randy came up and did Skull and Bones with you. I think that would be fucking awesome. Because that's still, just in my opinion, a very underrated like deep cut in Overkill.
That for sure is a deep cut, and it's something that is different for us, but I think that we handled really, really well with that. And Randy and me on a duet is as different as it is still something to hear.
Yeah, it was very different and very unique at that time in 2007 when that album was released.
I'm sorry, did you ask me a question?
Yeah, I just said like, especially with on Skull and Bones, especially with like your voice and Randy Bly. I feel like that was like you got two singing together was sound very different and unique at that time in 2007.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's more metal than they would do, and a little bit more hardcore kind of a vibe than we would do.
Right. And moving on to the next album, Ironbound. I think it's a great follow-up to Immortalis. Tell me about like this album. I think it's probably the best like modern Overkill album.
Well, Immortalis has Ron Lipnicki on it. It gave us kind of a new energy. So I think that it always takes somebody a record or so to get their wings, that kind of a thing. I mean, you look back to The Killing Kind with Joe and Sebastian. I think it's a little bit better the record after, which is The Underground, or if Immortalis is Ron's first record, Ironbound is his second. And he just played that much better. I think as far as we go, we kind of, it's not a reinvention. I think it's just a great representation of what we saw while we were touring Immortalis. And that was that the scene was getting healthy again. And that there was a thrash bug in there. There was younger thrash fans wearing the uniform. They had on the battle vests. They were wearing the high tops. They had on fucking leather jackets. They were 18 to 25. And we're thinking to ourselves, what in the fuck are these kids doing, wanting to see 50-year-olds do fucking thrash music? And it didn't influence the music directly. Like, we didn't say, oh, we should write this way. I think it just happened indirectly or organically. And I think that that's what makes the record good, that it wasn't overthought. It was just, I would get a tune from Dee and go, wow, that's really thrashy, man. He's like, yeah, I was in kind of a thrashy mood. I was like, yeah, I really like, and then boom, next thing you know, Green and Black is done. So yeah, I look at that record as, not a rebirth necessarily, but for sure the representation of how healthy the scene was getting around us. And I think that we just reflected it in whatever music we're writing. And I agree with you. I think it's one of our better later records that we've ever done. I mean, maybe the best in the later years.
Yeah, especially like the Green and Black great opener. Almost feels similar to like Time to Kill with like the extended intro and sort of like the build up. Even the title track has like a great fast song. It's just like this whole album is just great, especially like Bring Me the Night is just like a really just another fast song. It's just a freaking kick-ass album.
It was a good time to be in a band again. It was like it's always good to be in a band, but you could just tell things were getting bigger. You know what I mean? It was like the shows were bigger. There was more enthusiasm around it. It wasn't that, you weren't playing half full houses. You were playing a full houses again. And that was good.
Yeah, and then of course the next album, The Electric Age, I thought it was a great follow-up to Ironbound. I still believe like it's been over a decade since this album came out. What was that like going from Ironbound to this?
Well, I think Ironbound was more of a three-dimensional record. It was like done in 3D, that we took all that thrash stuff. If you could go to Bring Me the Night, but also do The Goal Is Your Soul, or do that center section of Ironbound. I mean, you're all over the fucking map with these different nuances throughout the record. And this was a little more two-dimensional, but I think in a really kind of a good way. I mean, I think there's some fucking songs on this that sometimes I put on and say, I wish we could do this in a set. I mean, I love the song Good Night.
Yeah, the last
Wish You Were
song.
Dead. I mean, some of these songs to me are just fucking off the hook. I mean, obviously, Electric Rattlesnake is a big thing. It's still in our set. I mean, all these
Yeah.
years later was a video.
Yeah.
But I think of this more as a two-dimensional record, like Let's Get Down to Business Again, as opposed to a three-dimensional record. But I think it's a great representation of the band at that time because thrash is kind of the it's I'm not going to say the flavor of the day, but for sure has now deep-rooted, visible people in it. And this record for sure represented that live.
Yeah, yeah, especially like the opening track, "Come and Get It," just has that great build up and then just goes all in. It's just a great opener on this album.
Right on.
Yeah, and then the next album, White Devil Armory, and hard to believe next year will be 10 years of this album. Like, what was that like making this album?
This record to me is a little bit confusing. I still think it's a good record. I think there's some good cuts on it. Armor as Bitter Pill, etc. I think that we were kind of in a template at this point with regard to Ironbound, Electric Age, White Devil. It's almost like the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. I don't know if you're Catholic, but that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
But the point is that I think it's a good record. I think it's mixed well, but I think the other two were the ones that preceded it were more. I'm not going to say valuable. I know some people love this record. I think the other ones. I think this is the same. A little bit more of the same that we had just done prior.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. Like especially like Armorist, and I especially love the bonus track. This version, I have the bonus edition, which has Miss Misery with Mark Tonello from Accept. How would you end up like singing getting him to sing a song with you guys?
We called McCaffrey from Nazareth, and he was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it." And he gave some like outrageous price we just didn't have, and so then Dee Dee and I talked. I said, "Tornillo's our guy, man. Tornillo's got that voice, He and I are kind of similar to some of, even though different, we can duet and make the two voices a third." So I called Mark and he's like, "Sure, no problem." And so he finishes. He was with Andy Sneap recording with Accept down in Nashville. And he gets the tracks done in like 3 days, sends them up. I was like, "Bro, this sounds fucking amazing, So he sang the whole song and I just sang the whole song. Then we mixed it together. We took out parts and stuff.
Yeah.
And I said to him, "If you ever need anything, let me know." He goes, "Okay, I need something." So that was quick.
Yeah, yeah, it would be cool
Mark and I started working with Rock Against Dystrophy. He was doing it at that time, and he asked me to come down and sing some songs with him. But he's just always been a great dude, great Jersey guy. I mean, I loved him all the way back in TT Quick. I mean, I thought that he had one of the more unique voices in rock and roll and metal.
Yeah, it would be cool if like Overkill and Accept did a tour together. It would be cool, interesting seeing Miss Misery really live with you two singing. I think it would be just mind blowing.
Big.
Yeah. And then the next album, The Grinding Wheel, I loved this album. And I remember the first time I ever saw Overkill was on this album cycle. You played at the Variety Playhouse in Atlanta, Georgia with Niall. And I also saw you that same year you did the tour with Crowbar, and Havoc. Like, what was that like this whole album cycle for The Grinding Wheel?
Well, there were some great songs on this record. First and foremost, I love the opener. I mean, I love
Green Killing Machine.
Nobody likes a 7-minute fucking opener, but for me, it was just like it went so many different places with that thrash, with that first of all, that intro.
Yeah,
that's
the drums.
That intro came out of I remember Dee Dee up one morning he was up in the bus in Europe, and we had this coffee machine. He would hit the coffee machine, it would go, and I'm like, "What the fuck are you doing?" He's standing there with a little recorder. He's like, "Shh, shh." So that's where the intro came out of. Yeah. Oh no, is that the intro to that, or is that the Last Man Standing?
I think it might
be. But in any case, that song went everywhere. Went to the blues, it went to rock and roll, it went to thrash, it came back, it was melodic, it was, it was non-melodic, it just was everywhere. And it was, that come heavy some of the tunes on that record I just love. I love the title track, the Grinding Wheel. I love the way all that big production came into.
Yeah, that goddamn Trouble, Shine On, like this whole album is just great.
Hey, I got 5 solid minutes left because I got another one at 2:00.
Awesome. So we're kind of going into the Wings of War and of course Scorched. I love this album. Funny enough, the last time I ever saw Overkill was right when the pandemic hit. It was on this album cycle. So tell me about that.
Were you down in Atlanta?
Yeah, that was literally March 11th, 2020. The last time.
We were shut down the next day.
Pandemic. Yeah,
we were shut down the next day in Charlotte. Charlotte was our last show the next day. Yeah, I remember that show. It was a nice theater. Buckhead, right?
Yeah.
Buckhead
Theater.
Yeah. Yep. It was well, it's hard. That whole fucking era is hard for me to get a grip on because that was
Jason
like the
Bittner
first
from Shadows Fall playing drums with you.
I know. I mean, I know all the shit that happened, but it's hard for me to get a full feeling on it because it seems like it was wiped off the map as soon as it fucking started. With this pandemic thing, it was just like, one moment we're out there doing, I guess we had done, 12 or 15 fucking shows. And then the next thing I know, we're home for 2.5 years or 2 years or something.
And was that
so
the time
it was
you did
great
Scorched?
playing with Jason. It was great putting it together.
And was it around the
I'm
time?
sorry?
So when you all had to go home, did you start making Scorched?
Yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, we started making Scorched. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
I actually had the majority of the demo when we had finished that part of the tour. That right before the pandemic, March 2020, and it was great having Jason in the band. I mean, there's always something cool. When we first lost a guy in the band, I mean, I guess the first guy we lost was Rat Skates. It was his own decision to leave the band. He wasn't thrown out, regardless of what you hear. I mean, it was just, I can't do this anymore. It was like, okay, whatever happens. And I think we were scared to death because all we knew was we were kids and all we knew was him being the drummer. But somewhere after that had happened, I think that we learned to realize somewhere that new blood can always help in some capacity. Somebody's going to always down it. But the other side of it is that you get some fresh ideas in there. And I think that that's great. And that's what Jason brought to Wings of War. And I think he even progresses that with the record Scorched. I mean, there's something about Scorched that just says it's all over the fucking map, but it's done so by plan. And that plan is somewhere between his feet and his hands. It just moves from one thing, one section to another. And I'm sitting here one day, during the pandemic, and I'm counting the riffs in a song called The Surgeon. I'm going, he's got 6 fucking riffs in this song. How the fuck do you put 6 riffs in a song? And then I realized because he did it seamlessly with Jason. That's why it worked. And I think that Jason is the reason that Scorched for sure has the power that it has, or has the I don't know. I'm not going to say popularity because I mean it is what it is, but I mean it has its uniqueness is because of Jason's feet, hands, and how he can seamlessly put those riffs and parts together.
That's great. So before we go, I just want to thank you for this interview. It's great to be able to talk with you. It's just anything else with Overkill you'd like to plug?
Well, we're coming. We're coming back out again. I mean, we just got back from Europe. I mean, you should see us down in Atlanta. I think we're actually at the Masquerade before the end of July. So July 13th, the tour starts out in the West Coast, and we're going to swing it all the way through the bottom of the states, and then up the East Coast. So we're just gonna keep doing what we do. So I guess it's not anything new I'm promoting, but we are doing something. We are doing something that we like doing, and that's touring.
Awesome. So everybody, Bobby Blitz from Overkill. We'll see you next time.